Okay, my working title for this video is Capitalism and Democracy, and I want to talk about how these two systems may have some benefits, but they are significantly flawed. And one of the ways in which we're seeing how flawed they are is the climate crisis that we're in. Because of democracy and capitalism, we're not able to move quickly enough to prevent climate catastrophes happening in certain parts of the world now and threatening even larger parts of the world. So capitalism on the surface seems to be this well-oiled, slick, elegant, streamlined machine, the invisible hand of supply and demand. But if you've traveled in poor countries, or if you ever worked on an assembly line, worked in a factory, done manual labor, because that's all you have the skills to do, or because it's your first job, and it hasn't been the right fit for you. Maybe you try and study to take courses so that you can do some other kind of work. If you've been in a situation where you find your job is soul-sucking, and I use the word soul intentionally there, your job is sucking the soul out of you, then you know how bad capitalism is for the vast majority of people. It's not an economic system that's based on soul values like love, justice, and truth. It's based on who has more money, more resources, and who has fewer. And it presents itself as allowing for upward mobility. But if you're born into significant poverty, studies have shown that you have far fewer chances of going to university, for example, and or even a trade school, even graduating high school, because you simply don't have enough support in your life. You don't have financial support, you might not have emotional support, your parents are away working their jobs, and so how are you supposed to be upwardly mobile in a situation like that? So if you're watching this video, you're probably in one of the more developed countries. You have access to internet. You're probably in an urban area rather than a rural area, and your country seems to have some kind of upward mobility. But I'm trying to say that for the vast majority of people, well, we know that 1 billion people live in extreme poverty, right? These people are just surviving day to day. And then the other almost 7 billion, a large majority of those people are working jobs that they don't like or actively dislike or hate. Okay, so we haven't built a system that's based on soul values, an economic system that's really based on equality of, I have this service that I can provide for you, you have that service you can provide for me, or we have money as a medium of exchange, and that it all plays out in a fair and equitable way. We haven't got that situation. So that's the first thing about capitalism. It presents itself beautifully. We go to the department store and there are 30 different kinds of cereal to choose from, 27 different kinds of detergent. We think we have all these options, but if you've ever tried to shift careers in your lifetime, you'll know how hard it is actually to move. And you might work as hard as you possibly can and still find yourself struggling, trying to make ends meet, because the rent is so high, or you have a couple of kids who are dependent on you, all kinds of reasons. This is not a system that's based on supportiveness, cooperation. it's based on ruthlessness, aggression, market share, return on investment, very quantitative modes that are not about soul value. So that's the problem with capitalism. It's an ugly, brutal system, even though it presents itself as beautiful and brilliantly efficient. So there are a lot of problems with capitalism as it exists. With respect to democracy, in countries like the UK or Canada, United States, Australia, there's typically an election every 4 years. So we exercise our democratic power once every 4 years when there exists the technology to participate in political decisions once a week, twice a week, once a month. We could all be voting on significant issues that our city council is talking about, the people in the state legislature or provincial legislature are talking about, or on the federal level. We just kind of ship it out to those people to be our representatives, rather than having a more direct form of democracy, such as exists in Switzerland, for example. So there are a lot of ways that democracy could be much more engaging and exciting. And I was involved in the Occupy movement briefly in the city where I live. It's not that I was involved briefly, the movement didn't last very long. But it was amazing to see how, in trying to build a better world, people were connecting with their soul, their hearts and their souls and their minds and their bodies were all in alignment, and we were all there in that space, what was called the General Assembly, trying to make decisions about our well-being, about the space that we occupied within our city. And so it was a wonderful, hopeful time. And it made me see why, for example, Bob Marley is such a powerful figure, because he unites political and economic criticism with spirituality. And I don't mean spirituality in a religious sense or in a metaphysical sense. I just mean your spirit and your soul are immediate to your political life. For Aristotle and the Greeks, being a citizen was a really important part of who you are as a human being. Unfortunately, Athenian democracy was extremely problematic. Only men could vote, and the institution of slavery existed amongst the Greeks. So I don't want to idealize them, but I just want to say that this idea that civic participation is a part of a whole life, a life well lived, that idea goes back to the Greeks, perhaps even further, I don't know. So now we've included, we've given, women have the right to vote. I shouldn't say we, I wasn't alive. Women have the right to vote. African Americans in the United States have the right to vote, for example. So democracy has spread out to include more and more people, which is great, but it's still something you do once every 4 years. And that's only one dimension of the problem. What about not having a proportional representation system? There are problems with first past the post. It doesn't measure the true vote of a community. And there are problems with having only two parties run, as in the United States, or as in England, for example. So there are a number of problems. I'm just trying to touch on these because it's a short video. And I want to touch on these issues partly because 2020, it has a wonderful idea of vision associated with it, and it's the beginning of a new year. And it's an election year in the United States. It's a really important time, given the climate crisis that we're in, to be examining the problems in capitalism and democracy, because we could prevent a huge amount of suffering that is already being experienced by people, as well as by animals who are destroyed in wildfires, for example, in Australia or in California. The climate emergency can be mitigated. It can be avoided, but we have to see that some structural change in the nature of capitalism and democracy may have to be involved. We have to move quickly on this one. Thanks for listening.